Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to this Halloween edition of Genre Benders, Obscurities, and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. Universal Studios is a house built by monsters, all of whom remain iconic to this very day. Unfortunately, the studio seems to have had a lot of trouble updating them. Back in 1999, they were off to a great start with an action-packed update of The Mummy, but the subpar sequels killed that franchise's momentum. Van Helsing was fun, but sadly didn't land with people at the time. The Wolfman 2010 should have done better, but a nightmarish production and lack of promotion doomed it to obscurity. Then nothing happened for a while until they made Dracula Untold, which was a very poor attempt at applying a superhero origin story to a vampire, and a second reboot of The Mummy ensured that the Dark Universe did not last longer than one movie. They tried again a few years later with two different Dracula movies, the black comedy Renfield and the more dramatic Last Voyage of the Demeter, neither of which got much attention or left much impact. Most embarrassing of all, they turned down Guillermo del Toro's pitch for a new creature from the Black Lagoon, which went on to become the Fox production The Shape of Water and sweep every awards ceremony. Yeah, Universal just can't seem to get the monsters right on film these days. Perhaps that's part of the reason why they switched to comic books instead. That's right, Universal is currently publishing comics through Image based on the classic horror movies, of which 3 are currently complete and collected in spiffy hardcovers. And since it's Halloween, it feels like a good time to take a look at these comics and see if they can succeed where the recent movies have all too frequently failed. As of this video's release, there are 3 completed titles. We have one for Dracula, one for Frankenstein, and one for the Creature from the Black Lagoon, entitled Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives. 2 more featuring the Mummy and the Invisible Man, respectively, are still ongoing. No word about the Wolfman, the Phantom of the Opera, or the Bride at this point, but I'm guessing they won't be far behind. Actually, I heard the silent version of the Phantom is getting a comic book from Legendary, which is their right to do since it's in the public domain and all. Well, Universal still has the color version of the Phantom with Claude Rains. True, even though that's not the more famous one. Anyway, it's these 3 that I've currently got, so these are the 3 I'll be focusing on. I guess the best place to start our analysis is with the artwork. Matthew Roberts did the art for Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives, and overall, the art is good. The jungle scenes are drawn to be incredibly dense, and the addition of dark and dull colors makes the environment feel foreboding and unwelcoming. This is enhanced by how the depiction of water interprets the black part of Black Lagoon literally. Water in this book is murky and dark, looking more like oil most of the time. The result is a jungle that no sane person would ever want to enter, a perfect setting for a horror story involving the Gill Man. The human designs are also good, especially our protagonist Kate Marsden. Though she's attractive, you can tell from the strategically placed lines on her face that she's been through a lot, and she is haggard as a result. Her foe, the murderous psychopath Collier, gets a design that instantly conveys his status as a hardened madman. The scar on his face tells us he has lived a life of violence, and his eyes have a permanent dead stare that only a dangerous killer would have. Still, the overall presentation is what you might expect from a comic book. No single panel stands out as really interesting, but none look bad either. Unfortunately, I'm not really thrilled with the creature's design. It's still recognizable as the creature, but some of the new aesthetic choices just don't land. It starts with the addition of sharp teeth in his mouth. Granted, this is nothing new. Visible sharp teeth have been a feature ever since Mad Monster Party, but the creature's design needs to be very specific for the teeth to look right. The original design didn't need obvious teeth, and neither does this one. They just look kind of distracting, especially against the bright red lips. The new gills don't thrill me either. Most of the time the creature's gills are on the side of his head, looking almost like sideburns. Here they are enlarged to wrap around onto his face, but it just makes it look like he's got really heavy bags under his eyes. Speaking of which, usually the creature's eyes have pupils. In this comic, though, his eyes are featureless blue orbs, orange on the covers for some reason, and I think that was a mistake. Pupilless eyes, or eyes that are mostly pupils with little to no whites, are meant to look creepy and convey a sense of inhumanity. If the creature were the villain of this story, that might have worked, but he's actually the closest thing the comic has to a hero. As such, we have a discrepancy. The art is telling me that the creature is to be feared, but the story is telling me that the creature is to be trusted. And it's not like there's a deliberate subversion either, it really does just feel like a contradiction. Also, the creature has shoulder pads. I'm sorry, but they just look goofy. Moving on to Frankenstein, Michael Walsh is both the writer and artist. Walsh's art style here has more visual interest than the Creature book, implementing Dutch angles aplenty and visual choices that convey a lot even without dialogue. Take this shot of Dr. Henry Frankenstein holding— Hold on a sec. Just to avoid any confusion among our viewers, we know that the good doctor's name is Victor in the original novel and in most adaptations, but the comic is based on the 1931 movie, itself based on a stage play. In both of those works, Frankenstein's first name is Henry, so no need to correct us in the comments. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Anyway, take this shot of Henry Frankenstein holding the abnormal brain in a jar in front of his face. Thanks to the angle and a bit of creative artistry, the brain is positioned with just enough of Henry's face visible to make it seem as if there's no separation between the two. It is as if the doctor's own brain is on display before us, thereby perfectly conveying the madness of Frankenstein. Meanwhile, Walsh's impressionistic covers allow him to really let loose with the creative imagery, especially the primary cover that shows the monster only half complete, surrounded by daisies and a callback to the original movie's most infamous scene. Designs, meanwhile, stick close to how everything looks in the 1931 movie, since it is something of an adaptation, but more on that later. The colors by Toni Marie Griffin enhance the art by, somewhat ironically, practicing restraint. Every scene is dominated by two colors, though the colors vary depending on where we are. The interior of Frankenstein's lab is bluish-gray illuminated by lime green as needed, the village is predominantly beige and ash-gray, and the finale is a scab-like purple until the windmill is set ablaze with bright orange. This choice to be mostly two-toned creates the illusion of a black and white film strip that has been tinted, and when combined with a heavy use of jet-black shadows throughout, the result is boatloads of atmosphere. Far and away, though, the most visually stunning of the books is Dracula. Here, artist Martin Simmons goes for an aesthetic of watercolors as opposed to ink on paper, and the result is one of the eeriest-looking comics I've ever seen. Simmons appears to have taken a page from Hammer Horror for this one, as the colors are muted, largely sticking to a scheme that is nearly monochrome. In the presence of the Count, however, the color red appears. Sometimes the entire scene is crimson, sometimes it is a simple blood splatter on the page, but it stands out every time against the otherwise colorless environment. Again, character designs draw from the 1931 movie with a few liberties taken, but Dracula himself is presented with more visual flair than the movie ever mustered. Here, we never get a clear look at the Count. Sometimes it's because he is uncomfortably close, sometimes it's because he's deliberately distant, and sometimes it's because he's not physically there at all. This Dracula is not grounded, but ethereal and unnerving to comprehend, which really drives home the idea of him as an all-powerful vampire. On the other hand, though, Renfield looks like the creepypasta character Jeff the Killer. Why? Heck if I know, but I don't really like it. First of all, the stark white skin and lack of a nose makes for a monstrous appearance, even though Renfield is not a monster, he's just a nut. Secondly, of all the creepypasta characters to take inspiration from, why Jeff the Killer? Unlike Slender Man, who became a pop culture phenomenon, or the Rake, who people briefly thought was a real cryptid, Jeff the Killer is only really known for this picture and little else. It just feels like an odd thing to take inspiration from. That aside, though, Dracula has the best visuals of the three books, and you'll be remembering its images long after you've finished reading it. But a comic book is more than just pretty pictures after all, so how is the writing? That's how we'll really determine if these things are worthwhile. We must first make a distinction between the books. Both Dracula and Frankenstein use the 1931 movies as their foundations. They are not direct adaptations, but rather expansions of the source material. Meanwhile, Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives is a brand new story with no connection whatsoever to the original Creature trilogy, at least not as far as I can tell. Now, choosing to expand on a movie that set the bar for every horror film that followed is a risky move. That said, though, of all the classics, the 1931 Dracula could benefit the most from expansion. Don't freak out, I'm not saying the movie is bad. Rather, I'm saying that it could have been better. As amazing as the performances are, the cinematography is kind of bland, the show don't tell rule is broken constantly, and it feels like a couple of scenes are missing. I bring all of that up to say that the comic's choice to expand on the original movie was absolutely the right call. Surprisingly, Dracula himself is not in it very much. He's not even the main character, and once again, taking a cue from Hammer, he has no spoken dialogue. It sort of harkens back to Bram Stoker's original novel, where conversations with the Count are, recounted, and characters claim to hear his voice in their heads, but we never actually get the vampire's perspective. He is an external force, as unknowable as he is menacing. Instead, writer James Tynion IV focuses on Renfield, which puts an interesting spin on this familiar story. In most adaptations, Renfield is depicted as wretched and pitiful, sometimes even comedic, but he's rarely shown to be sympathetic. He is Dracula's disposable henchman who outlived his usefulness long ago, and usually no tears are shed when he gets his comeuppance. After all, when you make a deal with the devil, there's always hell to pay in the end, so he gets what's coming to him. The comic doesn't lose sight of those aspects, but it does shine a light on his tragedy. We really get to see how far gone Renfield is, how desperately he wants to remain in his master's favor, and how pitiable it is that he can't accept that his false god has abandoned him. It is only in death that he can be freed, and even then he knows that his soul is still damned thanks to what he's done. Really, you can't help but feel bad for the guy as you watch him delude himself into thinking Dracula ever had his well-being in mind. Even Dr. Seward, who has every reason to loathe Renfield for his actions, is still able to muster up enough human decency to forgive him as he lays dying, because Seward understands the truth about him. Renfield is not excused for his actions, of course, but we can now see him as the victim he really is. As a result, I think this comic should be required reading for anyone who enjoys the original movie, or heck, even those who enjoy the original novel. As for Frankenstein, the expansion is a bit different. Characters from the movie largely maintain their personalities, albeit with a bit more added range. Henry is a bit more arrogant, and Fritz is even more sadistic than his film counterpart. The monster in particular is slightly more vicious, especially thanks to the addition of a scene from Mary Shelley's original novel where he kills Elizabeth, who survives in the original movie. But none of them are the leads. Rather than zero in on an existing character, Michael Walsh instead throws a new character into the mix. Here our protagonist is Paul, a little boy whose deceased father is one of the bodies exhumed by Dr. Frankenstein to assemble the monster. Specifically, the monster has his father's hands. You know, that's not a bad idea. We all know that the Frankenstein monster is comprised of exhumed corpses, but we rarely get insight into who those corpses were in life, or how their surviving loved ones feel about it. The idea of following someone who knew one of the bodies and having it be a kid could be a neat idea. It could be, Snazzy, it could be. Unfortunately, I don't think it really works here. As mentioned, the monster has Paul's father's hands. My question is, so what? Hands don't retain memories. That's what the brain is for, but even then, there's always ambiguity about whether the monster's brain retains the memories of the previous owner or not. Sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. As such, the hand connection really doesn't matter, as the monster has no connection to Paul beyond that, and the one scene they share together yields no hint of connection.
What's that make us?
Absolutely nothing!
As such, this just leaves Paul to be inserted into various scenes from the movie, and every time it is both forced and somewhat inexplicable. He somehow manages to sneak into Castle Frankenstein unseen. He escapes the castle by falling out of a tower window and inexplicably surviving. He hitches a ride on Elizabeth's carriage and goes unnoticed until it's time for her to interact with him. Frankly, it kind of feels like self-insert fanfiction almost, where the author's original character has to be present for every major event and interact with every major character. But the thing is, Paul doesn't even contribute anything of significance to the plot. The most significant thing he does is join the mob as they march to the windmill for the finale, and he gets a chance to confront Henry alone with the intention to kill him. Yet one monologue from the Doctor about how he's lost everything and thus no longer cares if he lives or dies is all it takes for Paul to drop the knife and leave him alone. In the end, Paul doesn't actually do anything, and his inclusion is thus pointless. Mind you, the comic is still good when it's sticking to the story of Frankenstein, but the segments with this new character don't ultimately mean a thing. And that brings us to the Creature comic. Remember how I said he gets an original story? Well, here's how that story goes. Some time ago, journalist Kate Marsden was attacked and nearly killed by a psychotic serial killer named Collier. Since then, Collier has fled to South America, where he has become entrenched with the cartels, and Kate has had PTSD ever since. No amount of therapy or meds has helped her, and she has become convinced that her only solution is revenge. So she tracks Collier to his last known location in the jungle with every intention of killing him. Pardon me, Omni, but when does the creature factor into this plot? You're asking the right question, Snazzy. Much like in the other comics, the creature is not the primary focus of this tale, but you may recall that in those other books, Dracula and Frankenstein's monster are still central to their respective plots despite not being the protagonists or having frequent appearances. Here, on the other fossilized hand, the creature feels unimportant. He is there, but for the most part he's a distant observer who has nothing to do with the main conflict and avoids direct involvement most of the time. Now, Collier is revealed to have an obsession with water, and he is inspired by the legend of the creature to mutilate his body to become like the creature, but that doesn't require the creature to literally exist within that universe. In fact, one page even features Collier introducing himself as the creature from the Black Lagoon, which makes me wonder if the genuine creature was ever supposed to be there at all. Was this just an original revenge story that either Dan Waters or Ram V came up with and added the creature to later? Whatever the case, the lack of presence the eponymous monster has is extremely noticeable. Literally, the only thing the creature does of substance is get freaked out when Kate finally kills Collier at the end, prompting him to run off in disgust and leave Kate alone in the jungle with no way home. Sure, it's part of the message about the futility of revenge, but again, does the creature need to be there for that? Look, I realize I might be coming across as a little harsh towards this one, but can you blame me? The creature from the Black Lagoon is my favorite of the Universal monsters, although Universal itself doesn't seem to care much for him. He's rarely ever brought back for monster mashes, and even when he is, he's a background character most of the time. Universal has never moved forward with a reboot for him, despite such high-profile directors as John Carpenter and Guillermo del Toro being attached, so I'm not holding my breath waiting for the James Wan project. This comic is the first new material the creature has gotten in years, and it treats him like an afterthought. He is little more than a glorified cameo in his own book, there to contribute nothing at all. I'm sorry, but I just can't get behind that. I want a creature story where the creature matters, and this isn't it. In the end, I would rank these three by saying Dracula is the strongest, Creature from the Black Lagoon Lives is the weakest, and Frankenstein is somewhere in between the two. That's where I'll leave it for now, and here's hoping the other two pick up the slack. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. You know, I'm kind of surprised that Universal hasn't been using the comics as a way to relaunch the Dark Universe. Not that I'm endorsing that idea, mind you, I'm merely observing.